Well, it is almost 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm up. I was cold, so I'm up anyway. I did turn on the heat. But there's Rocky. Hey, hi, Rocky. There he is. He's on his coat there. He loves his coat. He does. I hope that you saw him there. I don't know what appeared in the screen because it was pointing towards Rocky and away from me. I could ask Rocky if he saw himself in the screen, but he never answers me when I ask him those questions. He never seems to. He just looks at me. So, anyway, I don't think I'm going to get a straight answer from him. That's for sure. Um, Again, what I have noticed, one of the problems that we have here in Canada, and I'm going to get on this kick again about what's happening here in this country, is we have a weak constitution. We have a very weak constitution, and we have an extremely cognitively dissonant population, and an extremely cowardly population. That's changing gradually. People are beginning to know. Oh, look, there I am. Hello, hello. Hey. Anyway, that's changed. Look at that. I had the big bald head there, and the lens, and the glasses there. Um, as it stands, though, as it stands, that is gradually changing as more and more people are affected negatively by the policies of the Trudeau government. And of course, a lot of people want to blame Trudeau exclusively, and Trudeau is a huge part of it. Don't get me wrong, he is. He's a Trudeau. Trudeau is really, he's a criminal. That's what Trudeau is. He's a criminal. We actually have a hardcore criminal running our government. And no offense to criminals, because actually, I have more respect for the average criminal than I have for Justin Trudeau. Um, if you look at it, criminals at least have some honor. For example, if you're in prison and you're in prison because you're convicted for molesting a child, the average criminal will have no time for you. Justin Trudeau, though, he's pushing for people who do these things to have more rights. Well, he's taken away the rest of our rights for the rest of us are being taken away, though. So, I mean, the average criminal actually has more decency and more honor than Justin Trudeau. And in fact, technically, I'm a criminal. I have a criminal record. I'm a criminal. And I mean, technically, I'm a criminal. So when I speak about criminals, I'm speaking about myself too. I'm a criminal, you know. So by definition, I'm a criminal. So, but Justin Trudeau, he's a criminal who has absolutely no honor. And that's what we have running our government. We have well, he's just beyond. He's the type of criminal that if he actually did end up in jail, the other criminals would probably seriously hurt or end him. You know, really, they probably would. The other criminals in jail with him. Anyway, that's what we've got. And we've got a constitution here. I mean, American people listening to this will probably really, it'll resonate with them because they have a strong constitution. So what I'm saying now will resonate with the American listeners, I'm sure. And even the Americans are slipping badly. They're losing their rights very quickly. and they have the American government is pretty much a criminal government as well, you know. And not, like I say, not criminals who have any decency or honor about them, but criminals who will do virtually anything and are into the most base and corrupt type of behaviors you can imagine. And probably a bunch of behaviors you can't imagine, and in your wildest dreams you probably wouldn't think of, even imagine some of the stuff that these people are into. But, and the United States has kind of a cognitively dissonant population too. Although I think Canada is worse for that. The United States is definitely, they have a lot of cognitively dissonant people as well. But, and that's why this is happening there and here, is because the powers that be that are doing all this stuff to us, they rely on the cognitively dissonant to assist them. Really, they do. And they get a lot of help and support from the cognitively dissonant. And, these people aren't even aware of what they're helping and supporting. They have no idea. But it doesn't matter. They are still helping and supporting it. They're helping and supporting a rogue government here and in the United States. But the thing is, if we have all that, our Constitution, though, is very vague. Like, our Constitution will say things like that we have such and such a right. Say, like, the right to free speech is a good example. We have a right to free speech. Well, we don't have a right to free speech. What we have in Canada is a right to self-expression. We have a right to self-expression within reasonable limits. That's what our Constitution tells us. We have a right to self-expression within reasonable limits. Okay, define self-expression and define reasonable limits. And I'll bet you if I go into a room with 10 people and I hand each one of them a pen and a pad of paper and I say, okay, I'm going to say 2 things to you, and I want you, with each of those things, as I say them, write them down. And then for each of them, I want you to tell me what that means to you. If I did that, I get 10 different answers. If I went into a room full of people, handed them each a pen and a pad of paper, and said, okay, this is what I'm going to tell you these 2 things, and now you tell me what that means. You know, self-expression. You have a right to self-expression. What does that mean to you? To you personally, what does that mean? Within reasonable limits. What does that mean to you? To you personally, what does it mean when I say within reasonable limits? Write down what your interpretation of both of those things and pass your pads and your pens up to the front here, and we'll look and we'll see, and we'll figure out then, out of this group of 10 people, we'll just see the variance of answers we get. And I'll bet you I get a wide variance of answers. I mean, look, for me, I think that free speech, I'm kind of one extreme. I think that free speech is sacred. Because I think that without free speech, we don't have anything else. Free speech is the foundation that everything else must rest on. And so, if you don't even have the freedom to talk about something, then how can you have the freedom to do it? You see. So, I mean, if they're gonna crack down on you for saying it, they're definitely not going to let you do it. So to me, free speech is the foundation. Free speech is what you build your house on, basically. It's the foundation. Without the foundation, you're not going to have a stable structure. You can build a beautiful house on the sand and the house will fall apart because it has no stable structure under it. So to me, these phrases, within reasonable limits and so on, and self-expression, which is different than free speech. It's sort of the same, but it isn't, And again, it's open to interpretation. Free speech is not open to interpretation. Self-expression is. And what form does self-expression take? Because self-expression doesn't always take the form of free speech. I mean, there are people who express themselves by painting, by doing art. There's people who express themselves through sports. They play sports, and that's such a big part of who they are that they express themselves that way. My cousin, who I went to Easter dinner at her place, one of her little girls is a sports fanatic. Like, she's any sport, she's into it all, and she's good at it. She's good at it too. Like, she's a real athlete. And the thing is, see, she expresses herself through that. I, when I was younger, used to write poetry. Believe it or not, I did. I used to express myself through poetry. I also used to not so much lately because of the situation I'm in, but I used to build things out of wood. I used to do some carpentry. Well, see, those are means of self-expression. But also there's speech, but it doesn't say speech. It just says to express yourself, self-expression, within reasonable limits. Well, I mean, again, that's widely open to interpretation. I had a man come after me one time wanting to beat me up because I had said that I don't believe in psychology. And he was telling me that, how dare you think that you have a right not to believe in psychology? Well, obviously that guy's idea of freedom of expression and mine would be quite a bit different. He wanted to beat me up. I threatened the guy with a big wrench to make him back off because I was taking parts off a car at the time, and I picked up a breaker bar that I had there and I threatened him with it in order to get him to back off because he was coming for me, going to beat me up. Because I had said that I don't believe in psychology. 5 months earlier, I had said that. And he was just waiting to get me alone somewhere so he could beat me up. And when he did, I had to ward him off with a wrench. And he's saying, how dare you think that you have a right not to believe in psychology? That's what he was like. Well, I mean, like I say, his interpretation of self-expression or free speech would be quite a bit different than mine. Look, I believe in God, but I'll uphold an atheist in his right to say he doesn't. And if you're an atheist and you tell me you don't believe in God, I'll disagree with you as to the existence of God. But I will uphold you in your right to your beliefs, and I'll uphold you in your right to openly say what your beliefs are. And if you want to make an argument against God, I'll uphold you in your right to do that. And, I'll do that because I want to be able to make an argument for God. And if you're not allowed to make an argument against him, then I could also be forbidden to make an argument for him. So it behooves me to uphold you while you argue against him, even though I disagree with you. You see, if I cut your throat for arguing against God, cutting my own throat at the same time. Whatever I do to you, I'm doing to myself. If I'm limiting your free speech, if I'm in favor of limiting your free speech, then I have to be in favor of limiting my own free speech, you see. And like I say, in Canada, we have this, though. We have all these vague words in our Constitution. Within reasonable limits and it's all subject to interpretation. And so it leaves us wide open, because then the authorities can come back and say, well, yeah, but that's not within reasonable limits. Well, again, what are reasonable limits? I mean, it leaves everything wide open to interpretation, and then who gets to interpret these things? Well, oftentimes what happens in Canada is a person feels their rights have been violated, so they go to court and they contest whatever's been done to them by the authorities, and a judge decides. So we have judges then writing constitutional law, because now there's some of that happens in the United States too, but because the United States has words like inalienable and God-given and absolute, you have an absolute right, you have an inalienable right, you have a God-given right. A judge is pretty much limited in their scope as far as how far they can go with their own personal interpretation. So a judge may have a bias, personally, against a certain right. Like a judge may be very much anti-firearm, for example. But a judge will have a hard time getting around the U.S. Constitution, which says that you have this right to bear arms. They have a hard time getting around that, because it says you have a right. It doesn't say you have a right to bear arms within reasonable limits. The same with free speech. A judge may hate what you say on a personal level. They may just despise the things that you say. But if you go into that judge's courtroom disputing somebody trying to put a limit, fighting against somebody trying to limit your free speech, well, the Constitution says you have an absolute right to free speech. So how do you know? And that you have an inalienable right granted to you by God himself to free speech. So it really limits that judge's ability to shut you up, even if he personally would love to shut you up. In Canada, it's not like that. If the judge has a bias against you or against whatever position you've taken, he can shut you up, because it's up to his interpretation if it falls on his desk. Now, you can turn around and appeal, but again, that's more years in court, that's more money, and so the average person doesn't have the money to go to court the first time, much less to appeal through the entire system, and to take a case to the Supreme Court, if that's how far it goes, which would be the Supreme Court of Canada would be the ultimate final decider, but you got to go through all the rest of it first. To take a course to the Supreme Court is cost prohibitive unless you're a millionaire. Really, I mean, you have to be a millionaire to do it. The average Canadian will never have a case heard in the Supreme Court, because it's just too expensive. And even with the Supreme Court, it's really pretty much up to the bias of the judges sitting on that panel, because there is no absolute language. So it's like it's all vague. It's all within reasonable limits and like that. So you have this right within reasonable limits. Well, I mean, look, if you have a kid, if you're raising a child, and say the child, when he's 5 years old, he says, can I go outside and walk around? You say, well, yes, you may, but within reasonable limits. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you can walk around in the backyard? Does it mean you can go down to the end of the block? Does it mean you can walk around the block? Does it mean You can walk 2 blocks, 4 blocks, 8 blocks, 10 blocks from the house. What does that mean within reasonable limits, you know? You see, a parent will set absolute boundaries. They'll say, well, yes, you can go out, but you stay within sight of the house. Like if I look out the window and I can't see you because you've wandered beyond where I can see you, that's going to be an issue. So you need to stay within sight of the house. I need to be able to look out this window and see you at all times. You know, or yes, you may go out, but only into the backyard. You know, I don't want to see you on the street. You can go in the backyard, though. That's fine. You know, or you can go down to your friend's house, you know, or whatever. Your friend that lives a couple blocks away, you can go to his house, but no further, or whatever, you see. Or you can go to the corner store down at the end of the block or whatever. And see, you set definite limits. You don't give a child vague idea like that. You don't tell a child, well, yeah, you can go outside and you can walk and you can wander around within reasonable limits, because that's up to interpretation. And if the kid wanders off and they're gone, they're found on the other side of town or something, you know, the cops bring the kid home. They say, we found this little boy of yours standing on the street corner, 5 miles from here or something. And you say, well, I told you could go out. What did well, you said within reasonable limits. Oh, yeah, but 5 miles from here is not reasonable. And the kid could say, well, I didn't know that. I thought it was. I interpreted reasonable limits as that I could go that far. You see. So that's the issue with that kind of language anyway, is it leaves things wide open until you get a case tested in court, and then a judge would decide. And a judge would decide based on their own personal ideas about these things for the most part, because at first there's no precedent, so there is no law to go by. And then whatever that judge decides, that becomes the law, that becomes the precedent, that becomes the reasonable limit. And so, it's kind of messed up anyway. And that's one of the reasons that things are happening here as quickly as they are. That we're losing our free speech, and we're losing other rights too. Because we just have a very weak constitution. And that was done on purpose. That was done on purpose. It was no accident that we ended up with a weak constitution. Anyway, that's it. Just another point of view, at least from me. That's how I feel about it. It's my interpretation of it. It's my reasonable limit, I guess, as far as what I interpret it to be, and others may interpret it differently, but it's hard to deny that that's pretty vague language, and that it's language that's open widely to interpretation. Like I say, for me, I think free speech is sacred, except if you're getting into the realm of slander, if you're knowingly lying about somebody in order to cause trouble for them, or if you're advocating that we go after somebody and we injure them, or we do away with them, or something like that, well, then you're taking it too far. But there has to be a limit to free speech. I mean, if you're saying, well, we need to go out and we need to target this particular group, we need to target this race or this orientation or whatever it is, and do away with them or beat them up or whatever, well, that's probably taking things too far. But if we're saying, expressing ourselves, otherwise expressing an opinion, saying that we think that the actions of our government are unreasonable in certain regards, or whatever, or expressing our religious beliefs, or lack thereof, or whatever, the ability to do that, as far as I'm concerned, is sacred. And so to me, the reasonable limits are, you can push a long way before you hit that wall that would be put there by reasonable limits. But to another person, you may only push a little bit, and you've hit that wall of reasonable limits. Like I say, like the guy that came after me and actually wanted to punish me, wanted to beat me up because I dared to say that I'm not a believer in something he's a believer in. You know, I mean, if he had his way, anybody who expresses any skepticism or any disbelief about psychology would be severely punished. In my case, I believe in God, and I'll actually uphold you where you say you don't believe in Him. I won't agree with you. Upholding you and agreeing with you are two different things. I'll uphold you in your right to your free speech. You know, if you say if you say you disagree with me, if you say you don't believe in God or whatever, I'm not going to want to beat you up for that. I'll uphold you in your right to say that. I'll disagree with you though. So what I'll do is I'll say I don't like what you say, but I uphold you in your right to say it. I disagree with what you say. What you say doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't align with my personal beliefs, with how I feel and what I think. But I'll still uphold you in your right to say these things, you know? And to me, that's reasonable. But to another person, oh, we can't have that. That would be anarchy. We can't have that. We need to tightly control these things, you see. And so that's the thing. So, the vague language leaves things widely